and figure it out. That referendum never ends up happening. And then what transpires from that not happening is 70 years of militarization of Kashmir. And this is the most militarized region in the world, or one of the most. It's more militarized than the North and South Korea border. It's more militarized than South Sudan and Sudan, than Israel and Palestine, Afghanistan and Pakistan, and the U.S.-Mexico border. So if you think of all of what's happening at those borders, this is more militarized than those. And so you have around 600 to 700,000 Indian soldiers effectively occupying Kashmir. And we're not talking about, a benign military presence. We're talking about a military presence that engages in a series of human rights abuses across a spectrum, ranging from curfews and strict control of movement to night raids and missing children, kidnapping of young boys and children at night, all the way to, obviously, violence, sexual violence, rape. And then you've got, squashing protests and using pellet guns to blind protesters, all of which is a means to control a population and their desire, their political and social and economic will. And so anyways, what happened in August 2019 is, on one hand, Article 370 was already quite symbolic and kind of, if you talk to most Kashmiris, they'll say it meant nothing anyways, in the sense that they effectively were already treated like they had no political, social, or economic will. But the unilateral revocation of that article is a very bold move symbolically, because we know Kashmir is it's a hotbed. It's very sensitive. You've got two nuclear-armed countries, both Pakistan and India, both in conflict over this piece of land. So it's a bold move to unilaterally make that choice. But even more concerning than Article 370 being revoked is Section 35A, which is a part of Article 370, which basically protected Kashmiris and their property ownership, right? So with changing 35A, what you get is a real economic hit of what happens to our property and our land when Indians from mainland India flood Kashmir and buy out our property, or we can't sell, or we can't do business. So that is the real-time implication of this. While the rest of the world has already found out that the article has been revoked, Kashmiris inside Kashmir don't find out that Article 370 has been revoked, and there's a total communication blackout. So internet is shut down, mobile, landlines, all disconnected. And that's effectively keeping a population in total silence. So that, again, what is the function of that? Why would a democracy do that to 7 million people overnight? And it's, again, to prevent mobilization, organization, protests, any sort of free will to exercise a dissent against this policy.
What does revoking the article signal to BJP supporters?
Yeah, the revocation of that article was a promise that the BJP party made as a part of their election. They simply delivered on that promise. And I think what that tells BJP supporters and the BJP is, we'll get what we want. And what it tells everyone else is, if you challenge us, look at what we did here. And it goes back to the point I just made. If you can do it in Kashmir, which has been this contested issue for 70 plus years, then it's no big deal to pass the CAA or the policies related to the NRC, or building detention centers in Assam to house those, undocumented Indians who've been living there for generations. That's what it signals, is success and a groundswell of support for this.
So what I'm hearing is that what abrogation of Article 370 does is that it sends a signal to all the supporters in terms of what BJP is capable of and is delivering on its promises. If you could also talk about how, because when the Article 370 was revoked, the other narrative was that, okay, finally we have a solution for Kashmir, because a lot of Indians felt that Kashmir was a part of India and now finally Kashmir is a part of India officially. And is it a solution? Is it not a solution?
The reality is there's no solution if Kashmiris are not part of that. And that's simply what we see, is that no Kashmiris were consulted when that unilateral decision to revoke Article 370 happened. And all Kashmiris have been demanding for the last 70-something years is to be a part of that process. And so if you want a meaningful solution, well, certainly disengaging, well, not only disengaging, but brutally, stamping out any political opinion coming from Kashmiris is not going to lead to any viable solution. It's not sustainable, and it's not viable, and it certainly has no credibility.
So we've kind of seen similar patterns across the world in Xinjiang, China, and Rwanda of like heavy military occupation. Do you think that these places are comparable with what's happening in Kashmir? And if so, what role does foreign policy have to play?
I was going to mention this earlier, but I think if you're really it's kind of like the airplane level of what's going on, the 10,000-foot view. If you think about what's playing out in Kashmir and then what's played out in Delhi and will most likely play out in other parts of India, the reason this is so problematic, not just for Indian Muslims or for minorities or the Dalits or whoever, is that unfortunately, if you look at the region, we've got terrible success cases. And I say terrible success cases because we look at the Uyghurs in China and we look at the Rohingya in Myanmar. I mean, India saw this play out in 2 countries and it's worked phenomenally. And you're only further sort of confident that you could push this forward. And so I guess in terms of a foreign policy point of view, one, if India is quote unquote the world's largest democracy, what is our definition of a democracy in which this is possible? And then 2, knowing just the scale of just the impact in India, knowing what's happened with the Rohingya and what's happening with the Uyghurs, it just makes it that much more like real. It sounds eerily familiar to a lot of other right-wing extremist sort of moments of history in which people are round up and then, God knows what after that. And so that is, I think, the impact for if you're someone who is, here in America or anywhere else, like, why is this relevant to you apart from the fact that this is just another example of, violence and right-wing extremism, is that it's going to be done on a scale that you haven't seen before. And I guess in terms of like being more solution-oriented, like what can U.S. foreign policy do, or what can we as policymakers do, is one, being aware of this, right? Because I think most people
we're already
have a very
seeing the life-saving
view of
impact.
India, which is
India's
a very
squad
sanitized view, and maybe that's changing in the last
other
few
countries
months or
around
so.
the world.
India is
that
kind of
urgently
portrayed
need to
as this
improve
very
access to safe sanitation for the world's
like
poorest.
You think of like Bollywood and food and culture, and those are all still aspects of Indian identity, but the reality for so many people in that country is otherwise. And so from a foreign policy standpoint, or even from a policy making standpoint, having awareness of, one, what's going on, 2, understanding Western complicity. What is like the Western or American complicity in this all? Because you just had President Trump visit, right? And in the backdrop of him talking about how India is a great place and a great country, you've got the streets literally burning. And interestingly enough, last September during the UN General Assembly, around that time, the Gates Foundation awarded Modi a goalkeeper award. And that initiative was being rewarded as there was a blackout in Kashmir, as there was violence in Kashmir. And so you've got like one of the world's biggest philanthropic organizations shaking hands and patting someone who has blood on his hands for building toilets. And even that initiative, just as a slight digression, even that initiative that he was rewarded for, it's grossly overestimated, like the positive impact of that particular initiative, in which Dalits were actually forced to clean open sewage areas. Again, reinforcing that, like, you're lower than us. And that is actually partially the reason why that initiative was even remotely successful, is because it was on the backs of Dalits. I mean, this is what's happening, and then this man is being rewarded on an international stage for his activities, and that is what I mean by Western complicity. There is a, even a philanthropic complex, and why are we shaking hands with this individual? Well, part of that is because there's a huge market in India still, and everyone wants a piece of India. Economically, even in the West, like Silicon Valley, has huge interests in India. And so this is what I mean is, like, if we're going to think about being solution-oriented, what is in our control? And from a policymaking standpoint, that is this sort of influence, this economic influence. Like, can we put some pressure on Indian leadership for these actions?
Now you'll hear Yining's conversation with Rohool Banka about his experiences as a student protester.
There's a difference, like when they entered the library, there's a difference, like, because majority of the policemen in Delhi, population, the police are in itself Muslim. There's going, hatred towards Muslim communities. So this hatred, this polarization has developed the officers' mind in such a way that they have also actually started beating people with the preferences. Like, who is a Muslim, they will beat him, like, wherever you find. Like, if they find somebody who is having a long beard, creating a sort of identity of a Muslim, they will judge him. Preferential treatment towards this certain community is actually gone to the roots, creating a sort of biasness towards these communities. So we had seen these things already in Kashmir Valley, where we have, sort of military forces everywhere. You are being checked everywhere. It's actually happening there as well, where Muslims, particularly Kashmiris, are also, feeling not safe. I'm not able to, decide this thing that should I go back to Delhi for studying or not. It's creating a sort of question among a lot of youth, a lot of population of Muslims who are actually reluctant to go back to the institutions where they were studying.
Right, so local police officers act as a proxy to enforce Modi's ethno-nationalistic regime and creating a sense of fear among Muslim minorities.
Definitely. It's actually going in that way. I mean, if you see, it's a sort of, they're creating a sort of otherization towards these communities. I told you last time, like, if you see most of the Muslims who go to different parts of the country, I mean, it's really difficult for them to find even accommodation. Like, if I go to Delhi and if I want to stay somewhere in a room, or if I want to book a hotel, I will be checked in a way like as I'm somebody like a terrorist. So this sort of hate mongering and this sort of communal, because I mean it's a sort of series of structural violence towards this community. If you see the Bollywood of India, where you will see most of the villains in the movie will be who are Muslims. If there is a terrorist, he is a Muslim. So this sort of, I would say, like, this sort of image that is being manufactured in this industry, I mean, it's actually creating a sort of Islamophobia among the general public. So even if you go to the local person in Delhi and ask him for the accommodation, and if he finds your name, which is a Muslim name, he will be reluctant to give you the accommodation. If somebody wants to go to Delhi and want to study in a good university, for that he has to go there and find a good accommodation where he wants to stay. But he will not have easy access for that. So for him, his good choice is to stay at home. So, because education demands security, you need to think creatively. For that, you need to have a security need, which is not there for Muslims, I guess. I have faced this problem. I have realized it at different levels. Right now, I should have been there in the university continuing my PhD. But unfortunately, because of this violence, because of these sort of events, what is happening is that people like me are staying at home.
Thank you